All right, so have you ever like cracked open a history book and been completely baffled by how early civilizations all fit together?
Yeah, like trying to figure out which came first.
Exactly. Well, get ready because today we're diving headfirst into your stack. And let me tell you, this one's a doozy. We're talking early biblical history, but with a twist you probably haven't heard before.
Oh, this is going to be good.
We're talking ancient historians, possible plagiarism, even a little philosophical pondering along the way. Think Indiana Jones meets, like a really fascinating history professor. You in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so our trusty sidekicks for this deep dive are excerpts from Berossus and Genesis, Manetho and Exodus, and just to shake things up, Plato's Timaeus and the biblical creation accounts.
Sounds like a party.
Right. And here's the kicker. We're going to uncover how ancient Greek writings might have actually influenced the Bible. I mean, how wild is that?
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
So, right off the bat, one of the sources throws us a curveball. It suggests the Pentateuch, those first 5 books of the Bible. They might have been written way later than anyone thought, like around 273 to 272 BC.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
Right. And the reason it's such a big deal is because it all hinges on this fascinating character named Berossus.
Ah, Berossus. See, dating ancient texts is always tricky business. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing, and someone swiped the box top.
No kidding. So where does Berossus fit into all of this?
Well, the really interesting thing about Berossus is he was a Babylonian priest, right in the thick of Babylonian tradition. But he was also living in a world where Greek thought was, well, taking over.
Okay, so we have this Babylonian priest, but he's writing in Greek.
Exactly. He wrote a history of Babylon, but he wrote it in Greek. Talk about a unique perspective.
That's incredible. But what does that have to do with the Bible?
This is where it gets really interesting. Berossus wrote about this massive flood, a story with tons of parallels to Noah's Ark. Same kind of character, same basic plot line. Almost like they were working from the same blueprint, but adding their own cultural spin.
Wait a minute. You're saying there might be a Babylonian version of Noah's Ark? That predates the Bible.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that scholars are still wrestling with. Because if Berossus's account is older, well, that throws a wrench into a lot of traditional assumptions.
Yeah, that would be huge.
Right. It's not just a story anymore. It becomes about how ideas traveled across cultures, how narratives evolve over time. We're talking about the very DNA of some of our oldest stories. And it gets even more interesting when you start to compare the Bible, not just to Babylonian history, but to Greek myths as well.
Oh, you mean like Eden and Atlantis?
Exactly. Talking about your classic Paradise is Lost, right?
Right. But it does make you wonder, is it really just a coincidence that these two incredibly famous stories share such a similar theme?
Well, and it's not just the theme, it's the way both stories use paradise as a starting point to
Mm.
like really dig into the consequences of human choices.
I see what you mean. So, like, you have the Garden of Eden with the forbidden fruit, which is all about temptation, disobedience.
That classic rules were made to be broken
Yeah,
impulse,
exactly. And then you've got Atlantis, this advanced civilization wiped out by the sea.
a cautionary tale about what happens when hubris takes over, about straying too far from, well, for lack of a better term, virtue.
I'm seeing the parallels here. So it's like they're taking this, I don't know, this universal truth that humans have a knack for making bad choices, and they're filtering it through their own cultural lens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just highlights how these ancient cultures were grappling with some of the same big questions. But it's not just about Paradise Lost, right? Both the Bible and Greek myths love a good God's walking among us kind of story.
Oh, absolutely. And those are always a wild ride. You've got the Nephilim in the Bible, those kind of intimidating offspring of sons of God and humans. And then in Greek mythology, you've got, well, Hercules.
Another famous offspring of, shall we say, a divine father.
Right. So was this like the divine baby daddy trope just all the rage back then, or what?
Well, it's more than just a trope. The idea of divine descent was everywhere. It pops up in ancient cultures all over the world, and honestly makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Imagine trying to make sense of the world, natural disasters, human behavior, all of it, without any of the scientific and historical knowledge that we take for granted.
That's a really good point.
Myths about gods interacting with humans, well, they offer a way to explain the unexplainable. It's about finding meaning, even connection, in a world that must have felt pretty chaotic.
I can see that. But I'm guessing there's more to it, at least when it comes to the Bible. It's not just borrowing these stories from other traditions, right? There's got to be something that sets it apart.
Absolutely. There's a depth and a moral dimension to these biblical narratives that you don't always see in other traditions.
Mm.
Take the Nephilim, for example. Yeah, they're these larger-than-life figures, this forbidden union. But they don't just exist for shock value. Their presence is directly tied to the wickedness and the violence that ultimately leads to the flood.
It's like a cautionary tale within a cautionary tale.
Exactly. It's not just about cool stories. It's about the consequences of straying from divine law.
Yeah.
It's about this constant tension between humanity's potential for good and let's just say, our tendency to mess things up.
So I guess what we've been talking about is kind of like we started out questioning when the Bible was written,
Right.
and now we're finding all these connections to Babylonian history, Greek myth. It's like finding out your favorite band didn't invent a new sound. They were just riffing on something old.
Yeah, I do what you're saying.
But, I mean, that doesn't make their music any less awesome, right?
Exactly. And it's a great analogy because the Bible, no matter its sources, there's no denying how much it shaped, Western thought. It's like the
It's
foundation of so much.
Totally. So knowing all this, like, what does it all really mean for someone like me who, grew up with the Bible but never really thought about it this way?
It's like it lets us look at these old stories with fresh eyes.
Mm.
It's about realizing how rich and complex these stories are, how they came to be. It's like the Bible wasn't written in some bubble. It was part of this huge back and forth of ideas that was happening across the ancient world.
And who knows how many more connections are still out there, right?
Exactly. And that actually reminds me of something that really struck me in what you sent over. One of the sources, it talks about this theory connecting the table of nations that's in Genesis, the part with Noah's descendants, and it connects it to a similar idea in Plato's Critias,
Okay, Critias, that's the one about Atlantis. Right.
Plato's unfinished dialogue about Atlantis.
Right, right.
But here's where it gets interesting. In Critias, he talks about these 10 kings who ruled over different parts of Atlantis.
So we've got 70 nations from Noah and 10 kings from Atlantis. Is that the connection, just the numbers?
It's more about this idea of like a divinely ordained division of the world. Both texts are dealing with this idea of order, of lineage, where, power comes from a single source.
Wow.
Now, whether that means one directly influenced the other, or it was just something they were both thinking about at the time, well, that's up for debate.
Right.
But it's these little intriguing connections that make digging into these ancient texts so fascinating.
I'm with you there. We could do a whole nother deep dive just on this. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Big thanks to you for walking us through all this history and mythology and honestly blowing my mind a little bit.
Happy to be here.
And for everyone listening, if you're feeling even the slightest bit curious after this, I highly recommend you check out the sources. Trust me, you'll want to get lost in this rabbit hole.